called a nominal model, which is simply a collection of different cycle lengths. Okay? And the 6-year cycle is not a member of that nominal model. If you want to take a look at what nominal model we are working with, you can just simply click on the analysis menu, nominal model, and you can edit the current chart model, and there you will see the list of all the cycles that are being used to analyze this particular market. And you can see that the longest cycle here is 18 years in length. At least we call it the 18-year cycle. It is in fact 17.94 years. I can tell you how many seconds it is, but I think I won't bother with that now. The next shorter cycle is the 9-year cycle. Then the 54-month or 4.5-year cycle. There is the full list. I won't go into too much detail, but the longest cycle is 18 years, and the shortest cycle is 5 days. And you will notice that there is a 9-year cycle in there, and there is a 4.5-year or 54-month cycle. There is not a 6-year cycle. So what's been happening in Hurst analysis circles over the past few years is that people have been discussing this rather awkward 6-year gap between the 2003 and the 2009 trough. Okay, that's a 6-year gap. So there isn't a nice 6-year cycle that fits that fairly obvious big move in the market. So there's been a lot of academic discussion surrounding that. I proposed sometime last year that possibly we're seeing a harmonic echo, and that there is the evidence that there is a 6-year cycle that is presently playing out in the market. Some people have agreed with me about that. Other people have disagreed. Other people have said that in fact we should be positioning the 4.5-year cycle trough in 2003, and then this trough here in August of 2007 is a straddled 4.5-year cycle trough. But that makes things a little bit uncomfortable, because it then means that the trough in October of last year is a 4.5-year cycle trough, which it just doesn't sit very well with what's happening in the market. So I think that more and more that particular analytical situation is fading from popularity. You might wonder whether the positioning of the 4.5-year cycle trough and struggling with positioning it correctly calls into question the validity of Hurst's cyclic principles altogether. Fortunately, it doesn't. Hurst's cyclic principles are very robust. I keep saying this, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself for those of you who've heard me say it many times before, but Hurst cyclic principles are very robust. By that I mean that if there's a difference in analysis that two people have performed, often the difference is purely a matter of magnitude and not a matter of actually understanding what's happening in the market. So where one positions that 4.5-year cycle trough would influence things, I believe, more on an academic level, more than directly on an actual trading level. So I enjoy talking about it, but in terms of what we're going to be speaking about today, it's probably not very important. It's the kind of thing you can argue and debate at length after you've made your trading decisions, because your trading decisions will probably be made very much the same way, regardless of where you position that 4.5-year cycle trough. Hurst famously said that if you take two different analysts and they're both performing an analysis on a market using Hurst cyclic principles, then they will often come up with a different phasing analysis. However, the end result will be the same. And what he meant by the end result will be the same is that, in fact, the trading decisions that you're making are going to end up being very much the same. In other words, should I buy or should I sell? So, let's start answering that question. Should you be buying or should you be selling the Australian market? So let's take a look. The first thing you do when you're going to make a trading decision, of course, is you take a look at the bigger picture. So there is the bigger picture, and that's what I believe is happening in terms of the analysis. Let's zoom in and see what's really happening in terms of the bigger picture. There it is. When I'm looking at a long-term picture, like to display those semicircles. The semicircles aren't something that Hurst used to explain the phasing analysis that had been performed on the chart. That's not Hurst notation, if you like. Those diamonds at the bottom of the chart are Hurst notation, of course. And the diamonds mark the positions of troughs of particular cycles. But I find the semicircles very useful because the semicircles give you an easy, at-a-glance visual guide to what's happening to any particular cycle. So where are we today? This is a roadmap, if you like, of what's been happening in the Australian market. So where are we today? Well, we are here, of course. If this was a shopping centre guide, then there'd be a little mark here, and it would say you are here. All right, we are right over there. And in fact, I have downloaded today's trading. The market's closed in Australia already today, of course, and so I've included today's trading in the data that we're analysing, so we can have a look at that. Quite an interesting thing happened today. Australia, along with the rest of the world, is feeling bullish today, but we'll have a look at that in a moment. So we are here. So now, what does that mean in terms of the cycles? Okay. Well, what I like about the semicircles is that you simply look at what each of the semicircles are doing today, and you can answer that question pretty easily. Let's start with the longest cycle, the 4.5-year cycle. As you can see, if I draw a dot on today, and then an arrow indicating which way that semicircle is moving, then you can see that the 4.5-year cycle is basically moving downwards. Okay, the 4.5-year cycle is moving downwards. The next cycle is the 18-month cycle, and if I draw a dot and draw an arrow, you can see that the 18-month cycle is pretty much moving flat. Okay, at the moment, and then we can look at the next cycle down, which is the 40-week cycle. The 40-week cycle is moving down. Okay, and I need to change my scale before I look at the shorter cycles. Why am I looking at so many cycles? Well, because Hurst cyclic principles are all about the fact that the price movements of financial markets are produced or are caused by the effect of multiple cycles. Not only multiple cycles, but in fact an infinite number of cycles. When I started discovering Hurst's cyclic principles, when I started studying it for myself, although it kept kept mentioning multiple cycles, and it's one of the principles, it took some time for that to really sink in for me. The most important thing to bear in mind whenever you're thinking about a market using Hurst's cyclic principles, you must always bear in mind that there are a large number of cycles. So although we're going to be trading one particular cycle, you must always consider many of them, as many as you possibly can. Okay, so that's why we always look at all these different cycles and talk about what they're all doing, because they are all moving the market. Okay, so far we've got the 54-month cycle is going downwards. Generally, we say that means it has a score of -1. In other words, the 54-month cycle, the 4.5-year cycle, is pushing that market down. Now, some people say to me, oh, well, obviously the 54-month cycle or the 4-year cycle is a really big cycle, right? So because it's such a big cycle, it means that it is really pushing the market with a lot of force, okay? Hurst demonstrated mathematically, and I won't bore you with the details now, but Hurst demonstrated mathematically that in fact, when we're considering what's going to happen to the market tomorrow, for instance, okay, and when you're considering the relative strength of all of these cycles, Hurst demonstrated mathematically that in fact every one of those cycles has effectively equal strength. Okay, it's an extraordinary thing. So what that means is that the 5-day cycle tomorrow is going to be pushing the market in a particular direction. The 54-month, 4.5-year cycle is also pushing the market in a particular direction. Hurst demonstrated mathematically that in fact each one of them is pushing with the same strength. So that's really, really important. When you're sitting down to make trading decisions tomorrow, or you're watching the market carefully tomorrow, you need to bear in mind that all cycles longer than 24 hours, in other words, all cycles longer than a 1-day cycle, are going to be having the same amount of influence upon the market. Okay, it's a really quite a profound thought. That people tend to think that when we talk about the 4.5-year cycle, it's not going to affect what happens tomorrow. But actually it does, according to Hurst's cyclic principles. Okay, so the 54-month cycle is pushing the market down. The 18-month cycle is pretty much neutral, so we give it a score of zero. The 40-week cycle is pushing the market down, so that cycle gets a score of -1. So far, going only down to the 40-week cycle, we have a score of -2, which means that there is downward pressure on the market. All right, so I know Australia is feeling very bullish today. If you have a look at what happened, and we'll do that right now, I know Australians are feeling very bullish. Nevertheless, those longer cycles are pushing the markets down. Let's change our scaling to daily, and let's zoom in a little bit and have a look at the next cycles down. What about the 20-week cycle, which is the next shorter cycle? The 20-week cycle, as you can see here, is this green cycle, which according to this semicircle, okay, is still pushing up. All right, so we'll give it a +1. Why do I say according to the semicircle? It's very important when you're using the semicircles to work out what's happening in the cyclic picture of the market, that you understand that the semicircles are a very rough graphical tool. Okay, so yes, they're very useful for getting an idea of what the cycles are doing, but they're a very rough estimation. Okay, because of the cycle they go up and half the cycle they go down, and that's not necessarily what's really happening in the market. But it's useful for us to determine what's happening at the moment in the market. Now, what about the next shorter cycle? That's the 80-day cycle. Right. Well, the 80-day cycle is over here, and it is at present in the process of what's called topping. In other words, it's forming a peak, and then it's going to start turning down. You can see it very clearly on that semicircle. So in terms of what it's doing to the market tomorrow, it's probably doing very little. But in terms of what it's going to be doing over a period of time that we're going to be trading, and for the purposes of today's trader chat, and in fact generally for these trader chat sessions,